Donald Trump was interviewed by Tim Pool and was asked about his role in empowering Dr. Fauci. He denied that that was principally his fault and instead said that was Joe Biden. Let's watch.
Here at the Libertarian Party National Convention, they had one of their, I believe this one of their presidential nominees said he wants to see Fauci, the heads of Moderna, Pfizer, Biden, and you locked up for what happened during COVID. I don't agree with them, but there is a big sentiment. Elon Musk tweeted, prosecute Fauci. Fauci lied to Congress about the gain-of-function research that was going on, and now we have testimony
Well, I'm the one that stopped the funding, and this was funding from before me. I'm the one that stopped the funding. Fauci wasn't a big player in my administration like he was after I left. I mean, Biden made him the king of everything. And if you take a look at that, Fauci was not the big player with me that he was. And in fact, I did things that he didn't want to do. He wanted to keep it open to China. I said, you got to close it to China because it was all coming out of China. It was coming out of Wuhan, which I said right at the beginning. But the other thing is, and what people don't realize, I believe in federalism. I gave the power to governors. Some governors did a great job. In all cases, they were Republicans. And some, like in South Carolina, Henry McMaster, kept everything open. Others didn't. The Democrats did a bad job, a very bad job. But basically, I gave that power over the states. I gave it to the governor. I gave it back to the states. And I think it's something which, when people realize that, it's something that they respect.
So look, honestly, I think that was not a bad answer from Donald Trump to a question that it will continue to dog him among conservatives, and in my view, deservedly so. But to the point saying that, well, I let the states do what they want. The problem with that is the states were under tremendous pressure from people like Dr. Fauci and the health bureaucrats that were absolutely empowered under Donald Trump's administration, Fauci being front and center during the COVID response the entire time. And I don't think a lot of his own base people who are going to end up voting for Trump anyway, but some of the people who've left and prefer RFK Jr. or maybe even the Libertarians or someone else, the reason they're upset with Trump is that rings very hollow to them.
Yeah, you say it's not a bad answer. Is it at all a truthful answer?
The part about the states might be a truthful
What about
but
the part where you were standing on the stage, basically with your proverbial arm wrapped around Dr. Fauci, bragging about you being the guy who was in charge and responsible for the COVID relief effort? My recollection of 2020 is a little foggy, like a lot of people's. It does feel like it was a different era ago. But what I recall is that the relationship didn't start to sour until it became clear that Biden was benefiting from the perception that he would be better at COVID response than Donald Trump. And when he couldn't control that narrative, he started to say, okay, well, let's lean into the lockdowns. Let's lean into the kind of like authoritarian critique of how this is being implemented, because I'm no longer the one that's getting like a benefit.
Daily press conference where we put Dr. Fauci on stage, where he said, listen to this guy.
Exactly. And
so you can't say he was just one person in the room. He was front and center. He was in charge of it.
And RFK Jr. took exactly this hit at Donald Trump at the Libertarian Conference over the weekend. Now, he was pretty generous and, polite about it, but this is what RFK Jr. said of Trump. He said, I think he had the right instinct when he came into office. He was initially very reluctant to impose lockdowns, but then he got rolled by his bureaucrats. He caved in, and many of our most fundamental rights disappeared practically overnight. President Trump allowed his health regulators to mandate science-free social distancing, which undermined our First Amendment rights to freedom of assembly. We could no longer peacefully gather together. Now, regardless of what you think about the substance of any of the stuff and the science or whatever, I do think that, frankly, RFK Jr. is the more credible interlocutor here on this given issue. And he is saying, I don't know what he means about right instinct when he came into office. Obviously, there was no COVID when he came into office. But the point being that he was the commander-in-chief who was responsible for saying, no, I don't think my health advisors are right, if he didn't think his health advisors are right. He can't now come in kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, trying to do revisionist history and saying, I was the guy who stood up for your rights all the time. No, just the same way that Joe Biden has to own incumbency and being responsible for all that has happened over the last 3 years. Donald Trump has to own that he was the president when COVID started. And that all of those policies that people are criticizing happened on his watch.
And that it was his administration at the federal level. It was his Centers for Disease Control. And you can say, well, the states were allowed to make their own choices. And to a large extent, that's correct. But so many states said the state officials said, well, what is our local health department saying? And our local health department said, well, what is the CDC telling us to do? And the CDC is now trying to say, well, that was just guidance that schools should be closed, but restaurants can open, all the kinds of incoherence we had. That was just guidance. Well, it didn't feel like guidance at the time. It felt like you were going to be attacked as anti-science unless you wholly delegated the policy response to Rochelle Walensky and the people who preceded her and Anthony Fauci and all those bureaucrats who now are saying like, well, science is a process. We got some things right. We got some things wrong. You can take it or leave it. What we said, that's not the way it worked. It was your anti-science. You want the disease to succeed. You're engaged in exercise and human sacrifice unless you did every exact thing they insisted on at the time.
Yeah. Now, we have another big clip from this interview in which Tim Pool asked Donald Trump about pardoning Julian Assange. Let's take a look.
Julian Assange.
Well, I'm going to talk about that today, and we're going to give it very serious consideration. And we're going to have a couple of other things to say in the speech that I think you're going to love.
I've heard some rumors.
And you've gotten so much out of me, I should leave a little bit for the speech, don't you think?
Mr. President, it is an honor and a privilege. I really do appreciate you sitting down with me.
And you're very respected, I have to say. When I did a little research, and some of my guys said, and I met you before, but they said just a very respected guy. It's my honor.
All right, so it seems clear that Donald Trump didn't know who Tim Pool was until moments before this interview. But that aside, Tim Pool decides to ask as a last question. Didn't seem to reserve very much time for it. Didn't seem to be a priority, but he did get it in.
I'm glad it got brought up.
Will you pardon Julian Assange? And you heard Trump answer there in a way that he's answered about do you support restrictions on contraceptives, which is to say, I got a really great speech, remarks about this coming up down the line. I think you're really going to like my answer, but I'm not going to actually answer the question right now.
That does nothing for me. I wanted to hear yes.
Yeah.
You just said
it's not
yes,
hard.
one word. That would have been fantastic. And at the Libertarian Party convention, we talked about this early in the show, but RFK Jr. did promise to end the prosecution of Assange. And of course, the Libertarian Party candidate wants to do so as well. Chase Oliver, I'm sure the Green Party candidate Jill Stein has had the same thing. So there are people running for president who have been crystal clear that they would end that prosecution.
And don't forget that Donald Trump was president.
He was president. He could have done it. Yes,
he had an option. He was president.
That's what starts to annoy me about some of his defenders. Like, he's not an unknown. He was president for 4 years. We know what it will be like. Now, I think, some Democrats, and actually a lot of Democrats have backed off it, predicting apocalypse and the end of the world, and it'll be so, normalizing, it's so abnormal. Well, we've gone through 4 years of it, and is mostly a continuation of familiar Republican policies, no massive reining in of the deep state or the administrative state. Some differences on foreign policy. He taught at the Libertarian Party gathering. He did say, I didn't start, any massive new wars. I think you could still be critical of how interventionist the U.S. government remains, but it's true that he didn't start any new wars. But there was a lot of continuity. Some of us would have liked less continuity, would have liked more, break stuff. And we didn't get that. Maybe you believe we would get that next time, but
well, look, Tim Pool is very respected. But if he was open to a little bit of advice, I think the question to ask is, why didn't you pardon Julian Assange? Not will you pardon Julian Assange? I think you'll get a very different kind of answer from Donald Trump for the next bite of the apple.
All right, more Rising right after this.